Deep Dive Film School makes no claim of ownership of the film footage used in this episode. The film footage is owned entirely by the copyright holders. Deep Dive Film School uses the footage only for purposes of education, commentary, and criticism under fair use. Also, we're going to spoil the hell out of this movie, so this is your warning. Welcome to Deep Dive Film School.
This week we are joined by Kelly Simpson, a longtime listener and student filmmaker, to have a discussion about female filmmakers.
Let's dive in.
All right, everybody, I am Adam Sherlock.
And I'm Adam Palcher.
And we are joined today, as we said, by our friend Kelly Simpson. Kelly, where are you right now?
I'm in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. So,
Winston-Salem. Oh, how's Salem?
It's good. It's kind of heavy pollen season, so everybody's coughing, which is scary right now. So
yeah, well, I was going to say Salem. There is a total witch trial kind of a thing anyway. So if everyone's coughing, it just really brings it home, right?
Just ramps it up. Thank you so much for joining us, Kelly. We're super excited to have you. Everyone, please make sure to like and subscribe. If you like to what you see/hear, hit that notification bell, all that stuff. Let's get into
all the platforms, all the places, all below.
All that stuff.
Yes.
Let's get into this discussion a little bit. Sherlock, did you want to kind of frame up the discussion of kind of what we're doing today?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I remember several years ago, I worked for a nonprofit helping young people become filmmakers. And a former student of mine years and years ago, she made a short documentary that was about women in film. And, this would have been 2010. And even then, I mean, the statistics are still horrible, but they were worse then.
Yes.
And I think that it was one of these things that just kind of blew my mind and that kind of kept coming back to me while we were doing this festival. And so I think that it made perfect sense, Kelly, to invite you on the show, just because this is a field that you've gone into. I've watched, I think, at least one of your short films that you've put up online last year before last, maybe? Does that seem right? Or was it last year?
Pink?
Yes. Yes, it was really pink.
We went crazy with the gels on that one. Yes.
Yeah, but it was very cool and it was very meditative. And but again, I think that it's something, it's worth saying that we really want the perspective of a young woman who is kind of starting to go through that field and just like what your impressions of that are.
I think, and I could probably speak for Sherlock here as well. I think I'm coming into this discussion with more questions than answers, because what the fuck do I know as a white dude from Utah? I've been lucky enough to have a pretty privileged life, and no doubt. So I don't really want to pretend I know what someone less privileged is going through, like something like getting a movie made or whatever it may be. So
I think that whatever you and I might know, people have gleaned from the last 14 years of us doing this stupid show.
Yeah.
We're probably reached our apex.
We've had our opinions out there, but I'm super excited to hear what Kelly has to say. Let's go ahead. Weren't we? We wanted to kind of start off with a discussion of what some of our favorite films from female filmmakers are, and Sherlock gave us a test of picking our favorite. So, Kelly, did you want to start with that?
Yeah, I mean, I have like a whole list.
I do too.
I love a lot. And it was interesting, the topic of female filmmakers, it is kind of its own genre. I don't necessarily think it should be, but I know that it is, which is changing, like hopefully evolving as more women can like enter the field, like on equal playing fields with men. But, yeah, I really love a lot of movies by women, but I have a very specific fondness for Sofia Coppola. She's kind of an obvious choice for a lot of people, but I think less and less so the older I get. Like, I know that when I was a really young kid, she was kind of the only female filmmaker I knew of by name. And to me, I have a favorite of hers, which is Marie Antoinette. I think Yeah, which is a little like off base, but I mean, I think Marie Antoinette walked so Little Women could run. Like, I think that that movie really, if that had come out today, I think that people really would have clicked with it because, you know, she's doing all this stuff with like, she's listening to the Strokes and she's in a dress and like she's running down the hallways and it's like, there's the Converse shoes like in the frame. Like, I think all of that stuff is really genius. Like, I think that that's someone who just made the movie she wanted to make.
The anachronism was really bold. It was really bold because it was either you went with it, which I heard a lot of people do, or it totally turned people off because they're like, what is she doing? Right? It kind of went one way or the other.
Yeah, hugely. And I understandably so, like it's polarizing, but I think she's a bit polarizing in terms of all the stuff she does. Like, I think Lost in Translation and Virgin Suicides are obviously very, I would say the most like clean, like 3-act structure, very trackable. But like Somewhere is a beautiful movie, but it's very slow. So
Marie Antoinette, I think that's the only one of hers I haven't seen. So I need to put it on the list. But I've seen Somewhere. I've seen the other ones that you're mentioning. Lost in Translation definitely was one that almost made it on my list. That is, I've loved that movie since I saw it. It's got so many beautiful, perfect things about it.
It hurts your heart. It hurts your heart when you watch that movie.
It totally does, especially if you love Bill Murray.
Yeah, definitely.
But she has such a deft hand, and it really shines through in that movie. And that was like, that put her on tops of my list for a long time. Sherlock, did you want to get into your favorite film?
Yeah, just to go back to what you were saying a minute ago, Kelly, in the like hardcore punk scene, there's been a really interesting thing in the last, I'd say probably the last 5 years, I've seen it more so, which is people being taken to task for using the term female fronted hardcore band, right? In that exact same way that you're talking about, which is this idea of like, we should be so far past this being a novelty, and yet, right?
Yeah.
And so I just think that's interesting because you can see that sea change occurring sort of all over the place.
For sure. When you said that female filmmakers is like its own genre or subgenre, I was like, yeah, it shouldn't be, but you're right. It probably is to a lot of people. And that's what needs to change.
And I think one thing that's really interesting about that, and we'll get into this discussion more as we start to talk about more movies, are these outliers of women filmmakers that were kind of just coming along, building these stories, making these movies. And it was only once you understood that subtext that it was a female filmmaker that somehow paints with this completely different brush that you didn't maybe realize was there. Yeah. And so the one that I chose, even though there's lots of different movies to choose from, but I think it, in a very different way, obviously these 4 films that we just reviewed, we kept kind of, picking back at that scab of, well, what is it about the fact that it was a woman who made this? Like, what does that have to do with the larger context? And a movie that I think does this brilliantly, that you can watch and enjoy and then look at in a completely different light once you realize that a woman directed it, is Mary Harron's 2000 American Psycho.
Yes.
Because the book itself, Bret Easton Ellis, I think, really was trying to make an indictment of yuppie culture in the 80s by having this character who's so vapid that he reads all the liner notes of every single record and every review in Rolling Stone and then thinks he has an opinion, right? And then does the same thing when it comes to women and their bodies and their murders, which he participates in. If you've ever read the book, it's
super graphic.
It's the hardest book I've ever tried to read. Like, I set it down multiple times because, and I don't know if you've read it, Kelly.
I haven't.
But the way in which he is almost Asperger-like in the way he dissects Huey Lewis in the News, he speaks the same way about eviscerating people, where it's like, it is like so painstakingly detailed that it turns your stomach. You have to set it aside. And so for Mary Harron to then take that, who I love, what is it? The Assassination of Andy Warhol. I loved that movie also that she did before this, but I just thought it was so brilliant for her to then go and do American Psycho. And like, it's like the male gaze as seen by satire's sake from a woman's perspective, which I'm like, brilliant. So that I'm putting on the highest pinnacle there, because I think it's such a fantastic movie anyway, but you can look at it in a completely new light. I think there's whole generations of people who loved this movie that have no idea it was directed by a woman.
I think there's something to say about the power of different perspectives too, right? Like that's really like what we're after here, because we've seen every movie imaginable from a guy's perspective, I think. I mean, so just having that new, interesting, different perspective is going to change the landscape of film, if you ask me, because this is going to be stuff we've never seen before, and it's going to seem like, I don't know, Kelly, what do you think of kind of the notion that any film directed by a woman has a narrative of female empowerment? Like that seems to be one of the myths, and it makes me roll my eyes, but I'm just curious what you think.
I hope that women are not thinking about their condition of being a woman when they're making things. I certainly don't think about that. I just write things that I want to see. I know that that's the subtext always, and that's totally fine. Like that's great. I find that, anytime a woman can make a living off of something that's hard to do, like that's power. But I think it's interesting. I think like it's an interesting question from the perspective of like a maker versus a critic, because critics' job is to make those connections, and that's valid. But like artists kind of have to, I think the artists I admire the most are very separate from that process of kind of that meta-ness of like, my career is this, my career is that. It's like they're just making things like, again, to go back to Sofia Coppola, like, she just loved The Virgin Suicides as that book. She wanted that book to be a movie, and she couldn't bear to see anyone else direct it. So she did it, and she didn't really think about it maybe the way someone would these days, where there's I think a lot more conversation about like, well, why did you choose this? And what are you trying to say underneath what you're saying? And it's like, sometimes you just want to make the movie you want to make. And sometimes that text is there, sometimes it's not.
Not everything has to be politicized, right?
Well, and I mean, God, it's so interesting, because you're really talking about the intentionality of your own injection of context as an artist, which I think is the biggest, to me, has always been the biggest argument for more voices at the table, because it's like, no one is saying that there needs to be, more queer stories or more black stories or more undocumented American stories. It's just more stories from more points of view, and that whatever that story ends up shaking out to be, like Yahtzee, that's the point, right? And I think sometimes that gets lost when there's a feeling, which I would say comes from this default position that upper class white male straight America has comfortably couched itself in, which is like, well, I'm neutral. My position's neutral, right? And anything else feels weird and alien and scary. And it's like, well, no, it's just people's experiences, right? And that could be whatever it might look like. There's probably subtext as to why the Hurt Locker is the way that it is, that you would never know. That's just from Catherine Bigelow's, life experiences.
Well, yeah, you can't ask anyone to not put themselves into a piece of art like that, right? I mean, there's going to be some natural, human biases or whatever that come into whatever you're making, and your point of view on the world. That's what you're sharing, right?
That makes it interesting, right?
But like, men never really get questioned about that, even though there's hundreds, thousands of films about it. So. This one was pretty easy for me. Anyone who's listened to this, I'm sure Kelly knows the answer that I'm going to give here. But my favorite film, this is one of my all-time favorite films, is After the Wedding by Suzanne Bier. She's a Danish filmmaker. This insanely heavy, dramatic, emotional movie. Just really bold storytelling. And the acting here is unreal. Actually, it's too real.
That's the problem.
This movie, this is the one movie guaranteed can make me cry every time I see it. And I see that as a good thing. A movie that can make you flush with emotion and just overwhelmed is doing its job. She went on to do Bird Box, which ended up really just turning into a meme. And the movie was fine. I enjoyed it. I had fun when I was watching it. But the meme, granted, it is funny, and it worked. But she also did Things We Lost in the Fire with Benicio del Toro. And then she actually won an Academy Award in 2010 with In a Better World. I was able to interview her like literally days after they announced this while we were at Sundance. And so that was a super cool experience. I think one thing that really proves that she's one of the best female directors out there is that multiple of her movies have been remade in English. It always drives me crazy that they even do this. Both of them, After the Wedding and Brothers, were pretty much failures in my mind, but I'm very biased because I love her. And the first time I saw After the Wedding, it was an experience for me. Can't let go of.
Yeah, I think you guys, I mean, to be honest, you guys are the ones who recommended that title whenever you reviewed it. And I was like, didn't know about it and totally watched it, was just devastated. And I was like, Mom, you have to watch this. And like, it's just amazing. And I know Bird Box is kind of unfortunately a meme, or it was, but like, yeah, I think it is unfortunate that audiences aren't always super able to like find their way into foreign cinema, because a lot of the people I've looked up to have been foreign filmmakers.
Same.
Not, because Hollywood's one thing, but also independent cinema, that's really where female filmmakers on the whole and globally are really on the rise, like independent cinema in general. And yeah, she's huge now for me. I think she just has a beautiful like way with character, and just devastating in those like very human moments, which is
for sure.
Yeah, it's the scene with the father.
Oh yeah.
That is like it's so naked.
Yeah.
That it just makes me it makes me scared that like when I reach my weakest point in my life, like that's how I'm gonna act, which is like the most human and undignified like terror. And I'm just like, oh my God, man, how do you get actors to that place?
You I think of that scene in Dumb and Dumber where they're reading, where it's a Pacific Bell commercial, and they're both just in the bed, just wiping their eyes, and it's just a commercial. But at my age, the older I get, it's definitely easier to cry. I cry at every episode of Queer Eye. So I mean, I'm a softie.
Oh, my wife does, and I'm like, I'm not going near that. I don't need to, because I'll be inconsolable. So I don't need to go near that. Awesome. So let's okay. So this is fantastic. So that was our first challenge. Mm-hmm. And I'm really impressed with all three of us being able to actually pick a favorite, because I realized that for big time fans is a really hard thing to do.
Yeah.
So I think we did really well there. So here's the second challenge that I had laid out to everyone. And the second challenge was, what movie do we believe is the highest grossing film directed by a woman? And I definitely have the handicap here because I don't see nearly as many movies as either one of you. So I'm just like, I'm just shooting in the dark. But I did come up with with two that I suspect, but I have no clue.
Yeah, I mean, either I kind of went through an evolution of this whole thing, going through. I guess I'll just go first real quick. But going through my mind of like thinking of times of periods of time, I was like, oh, Penny Marshall and Big, that was probably really big at the time, and then I was like, also A League of Their Own is a pretty popular movie, like maybe one of those was. And then I was like, well, like Catherine Bigelow won for The Hurt Locker, so like maybe that one did really well. And then I was like, oh, I don't know, but like Wonder Woman came out last year, and Patty Jenkins with Wonder Woman is going to be my final answer. But even that I'm questioning, because I'm like, well, Little Women did, Greta Gerwig did really good this year, so like, what, I don't know. So I'm like, I'm constantly battling myself, but I'll land on Wonder Woman just because superhero movie and the worldwide appeal of those types of movies seems to be a little easier to swallow. Also, if you talk about inflation, movies when Penny Marshall came out with Big in 1988 are not the same as movies that came out last last year or a couple of years, whenever Wonder Woman came out. So.
Yeah, and I wondered the same thing because part of me was going like, well, Wayne's World, right? Like that's was Penelope's. Who is that right? Penelope Spheres.
Yep.
Yeah, and I was like, yeah, but, and then I thought about Wonder Woman too, and I was like, and I guess I'll go next, and then Kelly, you can round us out with your idea, because part of me also was thinking about Zero Dark 30, not because it was like a huge blockbuster, but I was like, pretty jingoistic America First story about, right? Like I was like, maybe that was it, but then part of me totally wants to say Point Break. Just on the residuals alone of like DVD and VHS sales.
Yeah, but we're talking highest grossing in the theater, right?
Oh, I don't know. Or all time.
I assumed. I mean,
you guys were going theater? Oh, okay.
Well, I mean,
shit, never mind.
I mean, I don't know how much the DVD sales. I mean, then I would go with
There's
big.
cult appeal.
I would go with big then because their DVDs have been on sale.
Okay, no, now I'm muddying the water. No, never mind. All of that off the table. Yes. Just box office theater. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry. I'll take that all back. Just box office. I'm going to go with The Hurt Locker.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's
I'm going
a
to
good
go
one.
with Hurt Locker. I'm going to go with Catherine Bigelow.
Yeah, I also had picked Point Break out. I didn't think about DVD sales, but I was like, I don't know what the systems were like back then as well as I do now, and also inflation's crazy. Like Avatar kind of like blew the market open for like.
But like Swayze and Keanu Reeves, like you'd think.
Such a good movie.
But I think my pick would, if I can go now, but I'm just inviting myself to go. But I think Booksmart would be my pick potentially. Although I didn't think of Wonder Woman, now I think that's probably correct. Just because I know that it was almost a sleeper hit. Like it was very slow to kind of get going, but once it did, I know a lot of people started to go out to the theater to see Booksmart, and Little Women.
Did they really?
I remember reading a lot where people were like, it's overperforming, but who knows what the budget was, and that could be very relative. So.
Yeah, we reviewed that last week or last time we filmed, and Sherlock thought it was kind of got swept under the rug, didn't you, Sherlock?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I thought that I was like I had heard something about it, but the fact that it wasn't something that I've been hearing everywhere really, really surprised me.
To be honest, I got a lot of targeted ads, so maybe they just know my demographic and they were smart about it, because that's kind of where I kept seeing. I was like, oh, Facebook really wants me to see Booksmart.
That's funny. That's funny.
Okay, cool. So I've got the 10 top grossing films directed by women.
Okay.
Wonder Woman is on the list. It comes in at number 3.
Ah.
Now these are all okay. So let's start from number 10. Number 10, directed by Sam Taylor Johnson, is 50 Shades of Grey. Number 9, director Nancy Meyers with What Women Want. That's the one where Mel Gibson can read women's minds.
A woman directed that movie?
I know. I mean, I guess that's how they got away with it.
I just always assumed he directed it, but
so did I. Yeah. Oh God, it's so bad. Number 8, Elizabeth Banks with Pitch Perfect 2. Mm-hmm. 7, Catherine Hardwicke, Twilight. Number 6, Betty Thomas directing Alvin and the Chipmunks 2, The Squeakquel.
Wow.
Loving it.
Again, like, if nothing else, this shows us like how low the barrel just is in general, that these are like the top 10 all-timers. Number 5, Shrek was co-directed by Vicky Jensen. No clue. Number 4, Frozen, co-directed by Jennifer Lee.
Co-directors. I wasn't factoring that in.
I don't know who. Yeah. Number 3, Wonder Woman. Number 2, Captain Marvel, co-directed by Anna Boden.
Yes. Ryan Fleck and Anna Boden. That's right.
And then number 1, the number 1 top grossing film directed by a woman, again co-directed by Jennifer Lee, is Frozen 2.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So again, but so if you take out animated pictures, which counts for 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 of them are animated films. So
Great. Shrek is on there.
Shrek is on the list. Shrek. So maybe Shrek.
Take
Maybe
it and
Shrek
run,
bumped
ladies.
out. Yeah, seriously, maybe Shrek bumped Hurt Locker or Point Break.
I was going to say with Hurt Locker, I know that I remember at one point someone remarking that it didn't do very well because it was released and then the Oscars happened and then people watched it like at Blockbuster back when that was a thing.
Oh, right.
But I was wondering about Zero Dark 30 as well because it is kind of like, oh, she won the Oscar and oh, this is like this big like Osama bin Laden movie, like so
right after the actual events or whatever, right? Like right on the tail of the actual
I remember
events.
watching that and thinking it was more like a video game when I watched it. It was like the kill Osama bin Laden video game, like is what it like because there was a lot of POV and there was just a lot of like stirring it. It's just hard. It's like I was playing Call of Duty or something.
Round lost? You guys suck! I'm on a winning streak and it's 0-2!
So Kelly, I'm really interested to hear about sort of your own personal journey. Like what originally from the time, well, I guess, okay, A, how old were you when you were like, this is what I want to do? And then B, what was that journey like after that of sort of to the point that you're at right now?
yeah. I always loved film from an early age. I remember watching movies and like not really understanding how they worked. Like I thought the actors made up everything. I was like, that's how it works. Like they're the ones saying it. They're the ones who write it. Not the case. I've since learned. But I took a film preparatory course my senior year, my last semester of my senior year of high school, and from a great place called the King Career Center in Anchorage, Alaska, where I grew up. So yeah, I remember telling my parents, like, I want to do film. And they were like, okay, we don't know how to help you with that. You need to figure that out. Like, because if you say you want to be a doctor, you just go to, college and you go to med school. But so I started off there because it was the only course available to me that actually was going to give me any sort of hands-on training. And what that course taught me was like, not only do I love talking about movies, I love the act of making movies. And that's a very big distinction for people. I know a lot of people have come through my program and gone, no, I don't really like the making. That's okay. I prefer the talking and I prefer the thinking, the watching.
Yeah.
Because it's not easy. It's a big difference. But I actually took a gap year after high school intentionally. I worked for a news company for 2 years. So I had 2 jobs for 1 year. And then the second year I went to a local college, and was still working for the news company. And I actually, from a recommendation from my teacher, who was the teacher of the film prep program in high school, she turned me on to 3 different schools. And I looked at the websites for all of them. And, the one that I remember, it was like falling in love. It was like love at first sight. Like I clicked on the website to my current university and I was like, I know that I'm going here. B, it's not negotiable. And, and also like, I just knew they were going to have to let me in because it was like everything I wanted in a college, and it still kind of is. Like, I really love my school. So,
you were explaining it to me off camera, and it sounded awesome. So
yeah,
there's like 5 districts you said of
yeah, it's the Hunger Games. It's it's a conservatory, so we have a music school, we have a school of dance, a school of design and production for theatrical stuff, and then a film school, and then the drama school, which is like, the drama school is like world class. Like if you look up any of the alums from that program, it's like above and beyond anything we're even doing, but we're a great school too.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we're very lucky to have access to that talent. Like I've learned a lot from my courses. So anyway, I took 2 years and then I enrolled at school here. And yeah, I've gained a lot from the experience of going to a conservatory because my education is very hands-on. So I got to continue that aspect. And my goals are kind of the same as they have been before, which is just, I want all the tools, I want all the know-how to kind of walk into the first foot through the door of the industry and just kind of not make a fool of myself being like, I don't know what a camera does. Like, so yeah. And I've succeeded, I think.
So what's the, I mean, if you had the magic wand, to be able to wave it and make whatever kind of story that you would want, is there a movie or a type of movie that you could couch that in, of what style that would be? And then secondary question, what you would want to make an audience feel?
Oh, that's a great question. Wow, that's a really great question. Well, the touchstones for me, I'm a big character study person. I know that's a little general, but my heroes, I mentioned before, Sofia Coppola. Actually, Gia Coppola, her niece, made this movie called Palo Alto that is so specific to particularly my cohort. Like I'm right on the bridge between millennial and Gen Z. Like it's a very specific space to occupy, and all the Coppola's movies, the whole family, like are very great with tone. I really love things that feel atmospheric. I love things that feel very very specific and very low stakes, but big arc. Like I think Richard Linklater is another huge hero of mine. Like the Before trilogy, like you read that on paper, or you try to pitch it to someone, they're like, "What's it about? I don't get it."
They just talk for 3 movies. They're just going to talk.
And then
they're walking.
And then they get up and they walk and they talk more. It's great.
Yeah,
You're gonna love it. Give me the money. But like those movies like could move mountains. Like they're so good. So, yeah, I want to make media for my cohort, my generation, because that's the experience I've had of being young, is not really finding a lot of specifics in media that are just talking about the things that are kind of this bridging point between two cultural moments. I really would love to make something for teenagers. Like I want to show run one day. Obviously a lot of people want to do that, but that's really kind of where my heart is. And then independent cinema is always, I feel like it's always out there calling people's names to be like, you can do it, like just get the money and you can make it happen. So
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great segue into this article that I found, this 2017 Women in Hollywood article, and it talks about 3 myths Hollywood relies upon to deny female directors studio films. And the very first one is what you're talking about here, is only directors with hit independent films or feature directing experience at all can be considered for a studio film. So that's the first one. And the stats behind that, it ends up being, so if you have a hit independent film, 1 in 3 male directors will go on to a studio film, and 1 of 8 female directors will.
Right.
So, and this was in 2007, so maybe those have those improved. Something like this, where are we getting better with female representation? I go to Sundance every year, and each year it gets more progressive. The last 2 years, over half the directors admitted into the festival were women. So it's definitely swayed that way for a little bit here. But obviously, you're never going to 100% solve sexism or something like that. You it's just like saying, we got all the terrorists, they're done, they're all gone. So tradition is always kind of the fallback excuse for a lot of these, but solely it seemed, I don't know, it seems hard for some closed-minded people to really not lean on their personal bias and look at something objectively. So it's really kind of interesting to see this. And I don't want to feel like we're creating things here, but the second one here, male directors are simply safer financial bet for studio-sized films. That was the second one, as far as the myths. But you know, I mean, Shrek is in the top 5, so.
Well, okay, hold on. Before we get to Shrek, I would just say, going back to your first point, which was sort of about this like independent zeitgeist then being a buoy to potentially a series or a showrunner or something like that, and that yours was 2007, right? That was from. I mean, I would at least say that. What's that?
Are you talking about?
Yeah, 2007, right?
17.
17. Oh,
Yes.
never mind. Well, I was going to say is I thought it was 2007 because at least, I mean, 2010, I'd say love her or hate her, but Lena Dunham's arc from Tiny Furniture into the Girls series, obviously Judd Apatow was a big part of sort of like championing her. But again, like if you watch that short, I don't know if you've seen that film, the independent film that she did, Tiny Furniture.
I don't think I've caught it. No, I've seen the show.
It's really funny, and it's I mean, in my opinion, it's better than the series Girls. In part just because it's quirkier. Her character was able to be weirder than maybe what you would hinge a consecutive series run show on. But still, the things that stayed the same were the conversations with her parents, who are both very successful artists, and then she's this like, you know, kind of in some ways a try-hard, like living in Brooklyn, being like, no, I promise I'm doing original things. And the Tiny Furniture is literally that, like, she has an art installation where she builds tiny furniture. It's very funny. But you know, you think about that arc that she took, and you would think that would be, from what you're saying, Pulcher, of like safe bet, not safe bet. I mean, that series probably made a lot of people a lot of money, right?
Oh yeah, and careers.
Yeah, definitely.
Adam Driver came from that show, didn't he?
Exactly, and look at him now. He's Darth Vader's. Who is he? He's Darth. He's somebody. Somebody's grandson. Anyway, but yeah, so that's something to think about.
Hugely, yeah. I mean, I was a big fan of Girls at the time, and I haven't rewatched it in a while, but she really paved the way. And I think of someone like Phoebe Waller-Bridge is obviously kind of the new iteration of like a really strong voice of an actress and a writer and a producer of her own content, and that's awesome. I think to kind of dovetail back to the studio question, like I think. Personally, I mean, if anyone wants to give me a job, I would love to take it. My heart.
That goes for all of us. Anyone watching.
If anyone wants to give me a studio picture to direct, I would love it. But not everybody is drawn to that. I think you get a very specific type of work experience with that. And I think artists, a lot of independent bred artists, whether it's aspirational or not, you tend to want to go towards the thing where you have more control and more flexibility. So I completely understand why, like, maybe the statistics aren't accounting for that. And it is a myth, I think, that they wouldn't do well. I think that's just complete bollocks. Like, that's crazy. Like, that can't be the case, but the content might drive away certain types of creators. Yeah.
It also seems like the potential job opportunities, it's either you're a director or you've made something or you're a screenwriter and that's it, where a lot of men, I think, can kind of take a different career path and still be able to be successful in something like that, right?
Right. I think there's sort of this understanding in a lot of male-dominated industries that they're kind of the median. They're the average. And everyone else is an exceptionality, which in society, that is, for many cases, that's true. And there's obviously people who occupy more than one identity. And so it's a complex conversation in that regard. But I am encouraged by the fact that that's something that's in the conversation now. Whereas when I was a kid, I don't have any recollection of people having nuanced conversations about women in film. And I think that list coming out 3 years ago now, that's encouraging to know that.
Yeah, it makes me excited for my daughter as well, just to have those people to look up to where a lot of women didn't, and they had to kind of figure it out or be inspired by men.
What's a really interesting, before you get to the third one, I just wanted to say this really quick, based on this conversation. I think one real interesting piece of this puzzle that never gets discussed is how how much more variety there is to an audience now, and how vocal that audience is of the things they want. Right.
Yeah.
And to kind of go back to your point, Kelly, this idea of there not being those nuanced conversations that you remember growing up. And so maybe in a lot of ways, maybe not even thinking about that. But once it starts to become part of a dialogue, you start to go, yeah, where the hell is this voice? And where the hell is that voice? And like, why am I always seeing this one perspective? I think it's really interesting to think about the evolution of the audience that is taking in this art and saying whether or not it has meaning.
I mean, you don't always know what you're missing. Like, I believe there's a TED Talk out there called The Danger of a Single Story. A friend had turned me on to that concept of like, if you only hear one kind of story your whole life, you're going to think that's all there can be. And I think with like more faces, more people behind the camera, in front of the camera being represented, it's so important because it expands everyone's vocabulary. It reaps more benefits and returns than it shuts out, I think.
Well, and yeah, absolutely. And, you know, film is such a wonderful medium for discovering the world. You know, you can see all sorts of different cultures and how people live and, you know,
well, that's just it.
Art, your own.
Our art fosters empathy, right? At least that's what it's supposed to do.
Sure.
Art is supposed to foster empathy. And so, again, if it is that danger of just one story, then what we're left with is that, you know, the idea that the victors of the war then write the history books, right? Like we need those other stories.
Mm-hmm. All right, the third one here, there's not enough of a pipeline of qualified female directors. So that kind of goes back to what I was saying of the opportunities seem like do this and maybe you'll get this, where, you know, and hopefully this is changing and evolving. I don't know how many female showrunners are there out there these days?
That's a really good question. I would be curious. I know that I've heard off and on throughout my years of film school, just the idea that like sometimes women are channeled more into producing roles, sometimes just because it's like a managerial thing. And it's more of like almost that sort of, you're putting puzzle pieces together, you're handling a lot of multitasking, as opposed to like, you know, being automatically channeled into like, oh, you should just be a creative and not try to like keep everyone else together in that way. Like, I don't know. I think it's a very interesting conversation. Obviously I'm very limited in my scope just because my education, I've only been studying film at one school for 3 years, but I just can't, I mean, that just sounds wrong even reading it, of just the idea that there's not people out there who are capable, like, and just to go back to the idea of like, I can't remember how many headlines a few years ago of like this unknown director who's hardly done anything gets like a studio picture, a Marvel movie or some sort of blockbuster. And it's like, well, somebody's taking a chance on somebody and they don't know much about their resume. Why couldn't it be somebody who's not?
Kelly, just, you know, and you may not know the answer to this, and I don't necessarily expect you to, but where do you see the stereotypes kind of existing in this world, whether positive or negative?
Oh, the stereotypes of like filmmaking in general? Like,
no, I think of females in general.
Oh, whoa.
Do we have time for this? What time is it?
Much to unpack, yeah.
Well, how about this? Let's focus on the positives. The positive stereotypes.
Sure.
If there is one.
I think there's definitely always positives and negatives to any stereotype. I think, well, not always positives to every stereotype, but
yeah.
In the case of this, I think that like, it's interesting. I do think that there's maybe a general feeling or a narrative rather than like a stereotype of individuals of just like, it's going to be 3 times, like you have to work 3 times harder and like, you're not going to get it. And like, that's because, you know, you're a woman and like everybody hates women. It's like, that's not always the case. Like it's a hard business to break into. And I don't begrudge anybody not wanting to do it. I think that there's a fine line there of like, with the headlines a lot. It's like, what I fear is that the Me Too movement, which is a very, very important movement centered around something that's very important to have a conversation about, kind of gets shoved off to one side as like, people slap that label on so many things. Like, I think that's a bit of a danger of like overgeneralizing, like, well, not every issue stems from like sexual violence. A lot of them do, but a lot of issues were already present before the Me Too thing started happening, and then the backlash started happening. And I don't know, yeah, it's a big thing. And I think I'd probably have a better answer if I was actually working in the field, but it's a bit like a STEM field where like you have like, I have friends who are coders, and like they suffer because like they'll be the only female in the room of men. And I think for women,
it's another place where it's huge for sure.
Huge.
Yeah.
Women who like are, you know, who have done shoots, like, you know, where they're the only female grip on the crew, or small ones, but you know, things like that where it's for cam ops. And like, I love seeing a woman like cam op, because that is hard to do, to put on all the gear and to do that. Like, oh my gosh, it's so taxing. But I think those are some stereotypes that it's like, oh, well, women aren't strong enough. Like the age-old ones that are like, they're absolutely strong enough. It's just, you know, not everybody chooses to do that. But
yeah, awesome. I think that it's an interesting, I mean, I definitely think that that idea of, again, to go back to kind of the Me Too aspect of it, of this sense of like, but we always pulled our genitals out on set. Like now because a woman's here, like it's this thing where it's like, well, no, you had problems already. It's just that because someone showed up that's like, you guys are idiots and assholes. Now you're aware that you're idiots and assholes. You already were, but now it's this thing that you're concerned about. Yeah, that's what happens when X amount of population is left unchecked for so long to do and say whatever they want.
Exactly. Yeah.
That once somebody shows up and they're like, you guys know this is really fucked up, right? That they're like, who let her in here or whatever, right? Like it's insanity.
Yeah. And it's in a different way. I think the internet's really kind of corresponded to a lot of movements. Like it's been a great launch pad for people in like middle of nowhere to be like, yes, I too have suffered this. Like those experiences weren't always until the internet. Like you couldn't collect that in the same way.
It wasn't a shared experience. It was unique to that person, right? And they felt that, and now they can have someone to talk to. Well, I can't.
It's the great equalizer. Yeah.
I can't thank you enough for coming on. This has been amazing to get your perspective and add some levity to this conversation, especially again, two white guys from Utah. So
we would not have had this conversation had you not been here. I would have felt deeply unequipped.
Yes.
So yes, thank you.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for offering the space for me to come and speak and talk and just share my tiny little perspective. It's definitely not, it's very specific to me, but thank you for that.
Oh, of course. Well, we wish you so much luck, and just hope you do well with your future as a director and showrunner. Very excited for you. I hope everything goes as planned. Please reach out to us whenever you would like. We loved having you on.
Can I real quick, I have like a list of movies. I know you guys had mentioned like my favorite, like I just have a quick list of movies I think are my faves.
Yes, please.
Okay, I'm gonna pull it up. Well, first of all, so one of my favorite movies is Vagabond by Agnes Varda. I actually don't know if you guys have ever seen a Varda film or not. No. I was very unfamiliar till film school, and a really beloved professor of mine kind of introduced me and a bunch of other students to her work. But funnily enough, I checked my email, and Criterion is releasing an Agnes Varda collection with like unseen work and like a bunch of behind the scenes interviews and stuff. So she's
what era is this that she was doing these films?
I don't want to misquote, but she's been around a long time. Like she was coming up, like I believe around the time of like Godard and like back in the 60s, 70s. Like she's old school, and she recently passed away.
Yep. She, I believe she is part of the French New Wave. She was one of the.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Which is what I forgot. Yeah. So she's incredible, and Vagabond is one of the most amazing things. Like, it's just great, and that her lead actress in that I think is just gives one of the best performances I had never even heard of before. So that's probably my other pick, other than Marie Antoinette, which is more of a sentimental choice. But she's great. I've met Kelly Reichert. She has come to our school spoken, and she's a huge hero of mine.
Yeah, Meek's Cutoff, amazing.
Oh, okay, yeah. God, Meek's Cutoff is insane. I love that movie.
Certain Women, another huge favorite. So she's a hero. Reed Morano is a cinematographer, but she directed a film starring Olivia Wilde called Meadowland. Very good. And she's doing a lot. Ava DuVernay also has come and spoken at our school. She's
that's awesome.
Sharing it up. I mean, she's just like, she's studio, but she's also, she's an artist. Like she has that perspective. And Claire Denis. One of my favorite directors, apart from Sofia Coppola, is Andrea Arnold, who did like American Honey. That's a movie. Oh yeah, great. I'm sure you've seen it. And then Fish Tank.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fish Tank's great. Heavy movie.
Yeah. So there's a million more. I mean, I have like a really long list. Some of them got brought up, but there's so many out there, and it's great.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, thank you everyone for listening to this conversation. Thank you, Kelly, again. Please make sure to like and subscribe, guys. All right. Thank you, Kelly. We love you. We appreciate you. And we wish you all the best success.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Put you on the other side. Bye, guys.
When do you guys think the next time we'll see a movie in a theater is? It's going to be a while.
Well, the last time I saw a movie in the
That's
theater
true.
was
You don't go to the theater.
It was like 5 years ago.
But for us normies, what does that even look like? It's not going to be the same.
Maybe October. I think all the Oscar contenders are going to like just be crowding out, or maybe sharing space with like all of the blockbusters that didn't happen this summer. Like,
yeah, it's going to be crowded at the end of the year for sure.
Maybe October. That's my hope.
And then does everybody have to sit like 2 seats away from each other?
I don't know, because I can think of multiple times where the person behind me was hacking coughing or something like that. And right now that would like, I don't even wouldn't feel comfortable even going to that, but I don't know.
What if they just had like each seat had its own little bubble around it? So you just had like a little bag that you'd climb into.
Well, I mean, I go in my beekeeper's outfit everywhere, so.
That's actually a really good idea, Kelly.
Smart.
Beekeeper outfit. I like that a lot.